Hello, this is Estella Jordan. I'd like to talk to you about the pandemic, a crisis of individual rights. I'm living in the state of Washington. The most dangerous virus here is fear, infecting the minds of media consumers. The real threat is not the contagion, it's the government's response to it. Corporate media has been diligently amplifying a carefully curated version of the coronavirus story and hammering it into the collective consciousness through endless repetition. Television pundits echo the fear incessantly, and social media platforms adjust algorithms to elevate the content. It does not take long for the masses to dutifully parrot the propaganda. Flatten the curve. The media can convince the public of anything. The only thing required to get people to switch off their critical thinking skills is to simply say that a claim is supported by an expert. Then otherwise rational people will accept the most outrageous of lies as fact. It is a fallacy to assume that government and corporate news sources are truthful. This is a logical fallacy known as appeal to authority. These same institutions assured us that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, that the Gulf of Tonkin incident justified escalation of the Vietnam War, and that babies were being yanked from incubators in a Kuwaiti hospital, all of which turned out to be completely and intentionally fabricated events for the specific purpose of manufacturing public consent for government actions. Never forget that U.S. doctors irradiated children just to see what would happen, poisoned pregnant women at a university clinic, forcefully sterilized Native Americans for much of the last century, and intentionally exposed Black Americans to syphilis. With a history like this, our government would be more likely to intentionally unleash a pathogen upon the population than they would be to protect us from it. These institutions cannot be trusted. If only critical thinking were highly contagious. The response from our politicians is inconsistent and incompetent. Even according to the CDC, the virus is only dangerous to a small fraction of the population. Most people who get sick are expected to have only mild illness and, quote, should recover at home, end quote. The virus seems to be so manageable, it is recommended that sick people stay home and be cared for by their families. No hospital or doctor is even required in the vast majority of cases. Considering how unlikely it is for one to develop complications from this, the government overreaction has been disproportionately excessive. Widespread shutdowns are doing far greater damage than the illness they are supposedly protecting us from. A much more practical solution would be the quarantine of sick and at-risk individuals, not a total lockdown of the entire population and economy. Economic downturns result in deaths due to lack of resources, lack of care for other diseases, and suicides. How many people will die because they can no longer afford shelter, cancer treatment, or insulin, or insurance after losing their income due to this forced shutdown? Markets are crashing and production chains are being broken. People are losing their jobs, savings, and livelihoods, not because they have been infected, but because of the direct actions of lawmakers fanning the flames of hysteria. Hospitals are running out of masks, gloves, and sanitizing wipes, not because they are overburdened with coronavirus victims, but because people are stealing and hoarding these items in response to that hysteria. There is no mass shortage of anything except common sense. The general public has become further divided and suspicious of one another. The sense of community is eroding. Neighbors are calling the police on each other simply for going outside. Fear-stricken citizens are isolating themselves and their families for weeks on end and keeping children indoors without playmates. The mental health of everyone is being damaged by social solitude, which is known to degrade the immune system while increasing stress and depression. We are being given health advice that is categorically bad for our health. Orwell would be impressed. We are told to worry about our medical system being unable to handle COVID-19 victims, but the truth is, they do not handle things anyway. Take a look at the death toll of our inefficient system and token social services before the pandemic. People have been suffering and unable to afford treatment for a long time. 68,000 Americans die every single year from treatable illnesses simply because they cannot afford treatment. Medical bills are the leading cause of bankruptcy in the US. The cheapskate CEOs are raking in billions of dollars. They do not care about your well-being. The much larger threat to the health of the nation is our for-profit healthcare system, because it is designed to serve only those who can pay for it, not those who need it. Flattening the curve is not going to change that. The motive for this controlled demolition of the economy is not difficult to discern. It benefits the wealthy immensely when there is a chaotic event unfolding. The effect is the destruction of small businesses, pensions, and retirement funds at the expense of the working class. Then businesses and properties can be bought at bargain basement prices, further consolidating the wealth of the nation toward the very top. The richest 1% captured 95% of the total growth in American wealth during the economic recovery following the Great Recession. The wealthiest families consistently benefit from recessions in this way. They are parasites who feed off the culling of the working classes. There is a common adage in politics: never let a crisis go to waste. And if there isn't a crisis, then create one. Exaggerating the effects of a virus provides a perfect opportunity for a controlled burn of the economy and an excuse for massive corporate bailouts, funded by the taxpayers, of course. All the desires of the oligarchs are more achievable than ever thanks to this perceived threat. They could not dream of a better position for us to be in, scared of an invisible enemy, not congregating, not demonstrating, mistrusting each other, and waiting for a magical solution supplied by the same government that plunged us into this panic to begin with. The COVID-19 narrative is an overhyped propaganda campaign, but it is serving its purpose. People are distracted, terrified, and irrational. History has shown us how public consent can be manufactured during a crisis, how civil liberties are then stripped and then never returned. The emergency powers put in place after 9/11 were supposed to be temporary, yet here we are 2 decades later with no end in sight. The radical measures being taken currently are granting the state with extreme powers that politicians will never surrender. Even if you believe that martial law is completely justified in this case, it's important to recognize how this situation is being used to control you. Fear is an effective tool of mass submission. There are far too many people willing to give up freedom for a false sense of security. I have never seen people so eager to comply and relinquish their civil liberties. In school, children are taught that we live in a free country and have a civic duty to overthrow a tyrannical government. In practice, we live in an oligarchy, and the people have been whipped into such a frenzy they are actively begging for martial law. Isn't it interesting how society has been injected with this idea that anyone, anywhere, is a threat and citizens should not trust, socialize, or even be physically near each other? What a convenient way to suppress the right of assembly. When the people gather in large groups and become difficult to control and surveil, well, it's no surprise that officials are promoting a total migration toward online socialization, where we become easily manipulated through algorithms, and all our digital activity and communication is analyzed, archived, and sold. A digital world would mean the end of privacy, which would make legitimate whistleblowing and investigative journalism impossible. All protests, dissent, and resistance to the state would be silenced before ever gaining momentum. We have already been accustomed to being disconnected, both physically and emotionally, in a large part because of technology. The subtle, ever-increasing forms of media indoctrination, like the current social distancing crusade, will perpetuate this trend. We should continue to socialize and seek out community while we still can. It will only become more difficult as the war on coronavirus advances. While people are being pressured to isolate themselves from social contact, there will be a tendency to resort to excessive online activity in an attempt to fill the void. It's important to remind ourselves that the carefully curated content on social media is not a healthy substitute for real interactions, and finding a balance is necessary for both your physical and mental health. So turn off the TV, get off social media, and go outside. Yes, outside. See this pandemic for what it is, and don't allow your mind to be manipulated by profit-driven corporate conglomerates. Thanks for listening. This is Estella Jordan.